She was smart, fierce, beautiful. A former journalist who gave up her career to build a quiet life in Connecticut with the man she loved. He was a rising star on Wall Street, an investment banker with charm, influence, and friends in very powerful places. Together, they looked like the perfect American power couple. But behind their manicured lawn and charity gala smiles, was a secret darker than anyone could imagine. Late one night, she wrote a single line in her journal, "If anything happens to me, start with Andrew's accounts." 2 weeks later, she was dead. They said it was an accident. A tragic fall in the bathtub. But then came the whispers. The safe found behind the nursery wall. Hidden files. Offshore accounts. And one name, buried in a coded spreadsheet, that sent a chill down every agent's spine. Her husband wasn't just wealthy. He was laundering millions for one of the most violent drug cartels in the world. And when she found out, she didn't run. She documented everything. Every meeting. Every wire transfer. Every threat. But knowledge is dangerous, especially when it threatens a global empire built on blood. This is the story of betrayal, power, and a murder that was never supposed to be solved. The story of a woman who got too close to the truth. And the man who would do anything to silence her. You think you know how this ends. But the truth is far more terrifying. Stay with us as we uncover the darkest and most disturbing real-life cases. If you love gripping true crime stories, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss what's coming next. To the outside world, Andrew and Emily Wallace were the kind of couple people envied. He was sharp, ambitious, effortlessly charismatic. The kind of man who knew the maitre d' at every Manhattan steakhouse by name, and the one who always picked up the tab without flinching. A self-made partner at the high-profile investment firm Halston & Reed by the age of 36, Andrew seemed unstoppable. Emily was his perfect counterpart. Poised. Intelligent. With a background in investigative journalism, she had once written scathing exposés on political corruption. But after the birth of their second child, she stepped away from her career and slipped gracefully into the role of wife, mother, and community figure. PTA meetings. Fundraisers. Holiday photos that looked like magazine covers. They lived in an immaculate colonial-style home in Greenwich, Connecticut. A town where the hedge funds are as abundant as the country clubs. Where the streets are lined with million-dollar trees and no one ever expects the darkness that sometimes grows behind closed doors. To neighbors, the Wallaces were warm, generous, private. The kind of family that waved from the porch and never made a scene. But if you looked closely, there were cracks in the facade. Small, nearly invisible, but there. Andrew traveled constantly. Sometimes to places that didn't make sense for someone who claimed to specialize in asset management. Bogota. Panama City. Belize. The stories were always believable, client meetings, expansion opportunities, but they became more frequent, and Emily stopped talking about them altogether. She smiled, but the sparkle in her eyes had dulled. And behind that smile, something else had taken root. Fear. It began subtly. Emily stopped attending events. She avoided certain phone calls. She became more guarded with friends, and almost obsessively protective of her children. When asked how things were, her answers were short. Rehearsed. Almost, coached. She kept a journal. Something she had always done. But now, the entries weren't about motherhood, or her garden, or future plans. They were full of names, dates, locations. Bank codes. Strange numbers. She began documenting everything Andrew did. Every phone call he took on speaker. Every encrypted message she happened to glimpse. Every cold, calculated look that made her skin crawl. And yet, she stayed. Was it loyalty? Fear? Or was she working on something bigger than even she could understand? By early 2021, Emily had hired a private investigator. Quietly. Carefully. She used cash and burner phones. She left nothing traceable. What she was trying to uncover wasn't just infidelity, it was something else. Something massive. Something dangerous. And then came March 3rd. The night of the fundraiser at the Goldcrest Country Club. Emily arrived alone. Her dress was elegant. Her hair perfect. But witnesses later said she looked distracted. Distant. As if her mind was somewhere else entirely. She made a few polite rounds, excused herself early, and left just after 9 p.m. That would be the last time anyone outside the Wallace home saw her alive. The next morning, at precisely 6:47 a.m., Andrew called 911. His voice was tight, trembling, but too precise. Too calm. He told the operator he found his wife unconscious in the bathtub. That she must have slipped and hit her head. He said there was blood. That he tried CPR. That she was already cold. Paramedics arrived minutes later. Emily Wallace was pronounced dead at the scene. The official report listed her cause of death as blunt force trauma, consistent with a fall. An accident. A tragedy. And for a few days, that's exactly what it was. Until the detective assigned to the case noticed something. A detail buried in the noise. A photograph on the wall in the hallway outside the bathroom, crooked. Almost shattered. As if something, or someone, had hit it. And that's where the picture-perfect life began to unravel. In the days following Emily Wallace's death, friends and family clung to the official story. A tragic accident. A brilliant life cut short. Funeral arrangements were made, condolences poured in, and Andrew delivered a eulogy that moved the room to tears. He stood at the altar with their 2 children sitting quietly in the front row. His voice quivered. He spoke of love, of loss, of how he would never be the same without her. Cameras from local news outlets caught the moment, his tailored suit, his tear-streaked face, his arm around his daughter. To anyone watching, he looked like a grieving husband. But the detective who had walked the scene that morning, the one who'd noticed the crooked photograph, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Why was the water in the bathtub cold, if she had just taken a fall? Why was there bruising on Emily's arms, consistent with restraint? And why was Andrew's timeline full of gaps? 3 days after the funeral, that same detective received a quiet visit from Emily's sister, Caroline. She was pale. Hands shaking. And she was holding something. A notebook. Brown leather. Torn at the corners. And inside, Emily's handwriting. Line after line. Page after page. Thoughts, fears, questions, evidence. The last entry read. He's going to find out what I've done. If you're reading this, and I'm gone, don't let him get away with it. The pages told a story no one wanted to believe. That Andrew had become cold. Controlling. That he had accounts she wasn't allowed to ask about. That he took frequent trips to Colombia, Mexico, and the Cayman Islands, but always claimed they were client-related. She had started taking notes. Tracking his emails. Following transfers he made late at night when he thought she was asleep. She had even copied a USB drive full of encrypted files and left it in a safety deposit box. The detective moved quickly. A quiet subpoena. A warrant sealed by a judge. And when they opened that deposit box, what they found was explosive. Over 300 documents. Wire transfers. Company charters for shell corporations. Notes with initials. Codes. Transactions tied to cash-heavy businesses in Latin America. Cartels. The FBI was brought in. Quietly. Agents began peeling back the layers. Andrew's firm, Halston & Reed, was a respected name on Wall Street, but buried in its offshore accounts were red flags. Investments routed through holding companies in Belize and Curaçao. Accounts tied to pharmaceutical distributors in Mexico. Import-export businesses with no real inventory. Names that matched known cartel fronts. Emily hadn't just found something illegal. She had stumbled onto a pipeline for drug money, hundreds of millions washed clean through financial instruments so complex, it took a forensic accountant to explain them. And then, there was the safe. Buried beneath the floorboards of the Wallace home. Hidden beneath the rug in the master bedroom. Inside, police found a burner phone. A list of unregistered LLCs. 2 fake passports. And a black ledger with entries in Spanish, entries that matched cartel accounting records found in an unrelated sting operation in Medellin. It was no longer a question of whether Andrew was involved. It was a question of how far it went, and how many people had to die to keep it secret. The FBI opened a formal case file. And Emily's death? No longer a tragic accident. Now, it was the centerpiece of a federal investigation. But Andrew didn't know they were onto him. He was still playing the part. Still showing up to work. Still attending memorial events in her name. Still holding their children close for the cameras. But behind the scenes, the walls were closing in. And the agents watching him knew one thing for certain. Emily Wallace hadn't died because of a slippery floor. She died because she knew too much. And someone wanted her silenced, before she could speak. What they didn't know yet, was just how many others were helping to keep that silence in place. Zava was the internal code name for a high-ranking operative in the Valverde cartel. A man so elusive, there were only 2 known photos of him. A man rumored to control the cartel's international financial operations. A man who had never once been charged, because he never touched the drugs. Only the money. And now, suddenly, his signature was all over Andrew Wallace's secret accounts. Investigators realized they weren't just looking at a corrupted banker. They were staring at a pipeline that ran from the jungles of Colombia to the heart of Manhattan finance. And Andrew Wallace wasn't a pawn. He was a conduit. But the most chilling part of the ledger wasn't the accounts, or the aliases, or the cartel initials. It was the last entry. March 3rd. 1 line. Clean the red. Package before Tuesday. E.W. Emily Wallace. Her initials. Next to a directive. A date. And a coded phrase used in cartel slang for disposal. Clean the red, eliminate the threat. Package. Stage the body. Make it look like an accident. And suddenly, it was undeniable. She hadn't slipped. She hadn't fallen. She was executed. The emotional impact shattered the team assigned to her case. The female agent reading the entry, just 31, with 2 kids at home, had to step out of the room. The lead detective, the one who'd noticed the photo on the wall, broke his silence that evening and called Emily's sister. He didn't use the word murder. Not yet. But Caroline knew. And what came next made everything worse. The surveillance team tailing Andrew noticed something strange. He stopped driving to work. Started taking different routes every day. Used different phones. Burned through 3 in less than 2 weeks. He wasn't acting paranoid. He was acting trained. That's when the theory shifted. Maybe Andrew hadn't just been recruited. Maybe he had been in the game for much longer. Maybe this wasn't just about money. Maybe this was about control. In 2016, 5 years before her death, Andrew had spent 3 months in Panama under the guise of a banking conference. During that same window, 3 major arrests were made involving rival cartels, and millions were seized. The Valverde cartel, untouched, began expanding into new markets. The dots were connecting. Quietly. Horrifically. Then came the second safe. Found not in the Wallace home, but in his office at Halston and Reed. Buried behind a bookshelf. It wasn't on any blueprints. It required a magnetic key. And inside was a single hard drive. Encrypted. Triple locked. But not impenetrable. The FBI's cyber unit spent 72 hours cracking it. What they found blew the case wide open. Phone calls. Audio logs. Transcripts. Voice memos in Spanish and English. Andrew's voice, arranging transfers. Discussing routes. Mentioning the girl, a term agents believe was used for Emily. On a warm June morning, 4 months after Emily Wallace was laid to rest, Andrew left his Greenwich home wearing a blue suit, Italian loafers, and a gold wristwatch that would later be seized as evidence. He kissed his children goodbye. Told the nanny he'd be late that night. Then stepped into his black Mercedes, not knowing it would be the last time he'd ever drive it. 7 unmarked cars followed him from a distance. He took the back route to Midtown, the one with less traffic. Parked in the underground garage of Halston and Reed. Walked up to the 37th floor like he had 100 times before. He nodded at the receptionist. Poured himself a coffee. At exactly 8:17 a.m., the elevator dinged behind him. When he turned, there were 6 men in navy windbreakers. No sirens. No shouting. Just a quiet voice. Andrew Wallace, you're under arrest for the murder of Emily Wallace, money laundering, wire fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. He froze. The coffee cup slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor. No resistance. No words. Just shock. In the hallway, his co-workers stood paralyzed. They watched as their star partner, the man who closed $40 million deals before lunch, was walked out in handcuffs. The media didn't get the story until noon. But when they did, it exploded. Headline: Banker husband of murdered journalist arrested in international cartel sting. The indictment was 147 pages long. The evidence, overwhelming. But even then, Andrew pled not guilty. His defense was polished, confident. He had money, after all. He brought in a legal team from D.C. that had once represented a senator. They painted him as the victim. Said he was framed by rogue elements in the DEA. That the files were planted. That Emily had been suffering from paranoia and delusions. They even implied that she might have taken her own life. The courtroom went still. Caroline, Emily's sister, stood up and walked out. The prosecution, however, wasn't shaken. They had something stronger than documents. They had testimony. The private investigator Emily had hired, the man who followed Andrew's late-night meetings, who retrieved USB drives from library drop boxes, who documented every secret she uncovered, he took the stand. And what he described, painted a picture of a woman who was terrified, but determined. Who had risked everything to do the right thing. Who said, in her own voice, in a recorded phone call, "If something happens to me, don't let them say it was an accident." Then came the FBI agents. The cyber forensic analysts. The offshore banking experts. They walked the jury through the numbers. The patterns. The disappearances. One by one, they revealed the other women connected to other men in the network who had also died under mysterious circumstances. 2 in Colombia. 1 in Aruba. 1 in Miami. The same pattern. The same type of staged accident. But only Emily had left a trail. The trial lasted 11 weeks. The prosecution called 42 witnesses. The defense, only 3. And yet, Andrew never broke. He sat calmly, smirking at times. A man so confident in his mask, he believed it would save him even as it cracked. Until day 53. When the prosecution introduced their final piece of evidence. It was a voicemail. Dated March 2nd, 1 day before Emily's death. She had called a burner number. Left a message. She said, I have what I need. I'm going to the feds. Tell Andrew I know. Tell him I'm not afraid anymore. The courtroom fell silent. Andrew's jaw twitched. His fingers clenched. And for the first time in 53 days, his mask slipped. The verdict came 3 days later. Guilty. On all counts. Murder in the first degree. Conspiracy to launder money for a criminal enterprise. Wire fraud. Racketeering. Obstruction. Destruction of evidence. Sentencing, life without parole. But that wasn't the end. Because the fall of Andrew Wallace triggered something bigger. 7 more arrests were made within a week. 2 of his colleagues. 1 sitting congressman with offshore holdings linked to the same laundering network. A retired DEA officer. A banker in Bogota. A hedge fund consultant in Miami. The case unraveled an entire financial underworld most Americans didn't even know existed. And at the center of it, was a woman who simply asked too many questions. Emily Wallace never saw justice in her lifetime. She didn't get to see the handcuffs. Or the headlines. Or the courtroom full of men who once laughed at her now choking on their lies. But she wrote it all down. She planned. She risked. She screamed quietly, in pages, in USB drives, in hushed phone calls. When the courtroom emptied and the cameras shut off, there was no applause. Justice, when it finally arrives, isn't loud. It doesn't celebrate. It sits heavy. And silent. Emily Wallace was gone. Buried beneath a weeping willow in upstate New York, where her family gathered every spring to place fresh lilies at the foot of a granite stone that simply read. Emily Wallace. 1979 to 2021. Truth has no price. The world moved on. But the echo of her story did not. Her 2 children were relocated quietly, given new identities, and placed in the custody of her sister Caroline. Their names were sealed. Their location hidden. Because even after the trial, there were whispers. That the network Andrew worked with wasn't entirely gone. That others were still watching. Caroline once said in a rare interview. They don't speak about that night. But they know. My niece still asks me sometimes. Why did mommy have to be brave? And I never know how to answer that. The community, once seduced by the glitter of Andrew's wealth and charm, was left shattered. Greenwich's tight-lipped elite held closed-door fundraisers in Emily's name, but none could shake the shame of having celebrated a man who dined with killers. One name, mentioned several times in her notes, remained redacted in every public file. A man she called the architect. Someone higher than Andrew. Someone who moved the pieces. Whose voice never appeared on tape. Whose name never appeared on a ledger. But who Emily believed, had orchestrated it all. No charges were ever filed against this person. No photos released. No confirmation given. Just a question mark at the center of a storm. And that was the piece that never left her sister. Caroline once stood at the foot of Emily's grave and whispered. I know you didn't get all of them. But you got the one that mattered. The world forgot, slowly. As it always does. Emily's case became a staple in journalism classes. Her reporting style, her notes, her voice memos, they were studied, dissected. A posthumous award was created in her name, honoring investigative reporters who took risks in the name of truth. And every year, in late March, a candlelight vigil is held. No microphones. No speeches. Just silence. And her voice, played softly from a single speaker. I don't want to be a story. I want to stop the story. But she became one. A brutal, tragic, unforgettable story. And now, she belongs to all of us. Not just as a victim. But as a witness. And a warning. Because behind every picture-perfect life, behind every well-tailored suit and carefully polished smile, there may be a truth so dark, so dangerous, it could kill to stay hidden. Emily Wallace uncovered it. And it cost her everything. But in doing so, she became something more than a headline. She became a legend. So now we ask you, was justice truly served? Or is the most dangerous player still out there, unseen, untouched, still pulling strings from the shadows? What really happened in the final days of Emily Wallace's life? And what truth was buried with her, that we may never fully know? If this story haunted you, if it made you look twice at the world we live in, then we ask, what would you have done in Emily's shoes? Leave your thoughts, your theories, and your questions in the comments. We read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and impossible to forget, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications.